future, or perhaps deep in the past, there was a planet named Reen, with water and land, animals, Mara, and people, in which all worked in harmony to kill one another, and sometimes their own. The animals and people from another kind, the Mara from this kind, the people being the Ednol race, that like humans, with their looks, imperfections, and emotions, they're a nonsensical race. However, like humans, they are crafty, with a planet brimming with dangers that could kill an Ednol within moments. I was surprised they hadn't died out long before. It seems an Ednol's thought and voice are truly their biggest fangs, with those becoming sharing and sharing information. Information being that the main source of prosperity, and also that of suffering. The one who controls prosperity and suffering is not the one of the mightiest army, or that of the sharpest sword, or even of the strongest man, but that who controls the flow of knowledge and knows how to properly wield it. Our precursor begins at the dawn of civilization. The Ednol people, during this time, were beginning to conjugate into small villages. They populated this planet from the great splitting mountains of Enum to the dual-distant plains of Suzenka. It seemed the Ednol race was hell-bent on littering this planet with their footprint, as myself could only watch. Despite this, they were progressing slowly. Primitive versions of society, and a gradual shift away from nomadic living styles. An uncountable amount of time passed, all of which was watching and waiting, all lost to history and blurred to myself. Despite the Ednol's best efforts, it seemed Mother Nature had conspired against them. She's always struck me a sadistic bitch. I think they never would have made it, if not for a single man, or perhaps thing. His name is lost to history, or perhaps it was never meant to be recorded. I know for certain his actions were not. All I do know is in every major contemporary source, there's a figure. That of a helping hand, some mannerism, angelic force, or even that of the will of God, if you believe in such a thing. Though only mentioned lightly, I believe it played a vital role somewhere along their path. Whatever, or whoever it was, it worked. 'Cause they began to grow. Not thrive, but survive. And they would have to do that on their own. This is where our story truly begins. In the western jungles of Enum, off the shores of a nameless village, soon to be called Capital.
My mother and father once told me of a story of two stars, two brothers, one which was betrayed, and another who had fallen from the skies, in which the fallen star mingled with men and brought about the events we know today. Uheril being the first star, our sky god over our lands and divine protector. Darkness would surely consume us without him. And then there was Riv, watcher of the mortal plane. Long ago, Riv and Uheril lived in harmony up above, but in time, Riv grew tired of Uheril's popularity with the common people. He betrayed him and broke our divine ray of protection. He was soon found out and banished to the mortal realm. Riv fell. He fell for so long, 1,000 days and nights passed. He continued falling more until finally reaching our world. Once here, he used his godly powers and blessed our people with unrivaled prosperity. He was beloved and adored by all manners of men, women, and children. Peace and harmony were the norm, as in contrast to now. What I would have given to live during those times! Mama would always yell, "That creature had no business in our world. I'm glad you've returned, Uheril." In a fury of drama, of course. When Riv first came to our world, we were but a small power. Mara and war hordes ruled these lands. Our village not sure even had a name. Or perhaps my mother is forgetful in her old age. Our village soon turned into a town, and with Riv's godly powers, the impregnable walls of Ural were built. It is said to be so high, a newborn baby's scream could not be heard from the top. The walls stood proud for more than 2,000 years and counting. We were the wonder of this world, and many people from all over came to visit this growing power. Soon our population grew, and with it, our curiosity of our neighbors. With the power of stars and knowledge beyond this little woman's mind, they grew into the greatest kingdom there ever was. The kingdom of Arun. My mama's ma says when her grandma was alive, she told her stories of the wonders of Arun. No man, woman, or child ever grew sick. Hunger to the Revis, or Nadan people as you know them now, was unknown. The Lidors of Arun and Riv were generous and handed out their wealth on whims. Neither the Nayuran to the east, the Merusapers to the west, nor even the Bokubertims due north were equals. There was true balance in those times. That all changed on the turn of the new timescale. I think the star god Riv became bored and left this mortal plane for a higher one. He ended thought to be an endless era of peace and harmony. What he left, I believe, was the twisted husk known as the same, Riv. He brutally killed the new Lidor in his sleep, said not to be any older than a boy. He marched on the greatest city there ever was, capital, the center of Arun. Riv's butcher was of such intensity that screams and fire could be heard and seen from all the way to Mayan. His men spread out and conquered the core lands of Arun. He had many crazed underlings. That most notable, however, Foul. Foul the madman. Foul the slaughterer. Foul the brother killer. Whatever you want to call him. I believe he was no Ednal, but a Mera in disguise. No Ednal could be so cruel. Riv ruled over the core lands and formed the kingdom of Rivston. He left the west to fend for themselves, leaving a breeding ground for decent and death. He ruled for over half a century, and things could not have been worse. The people were unhappy, food became a constant need, and my grandma saw many of her friends die before her eyes. Despair was rampant in the streets, and ethnic groups began becoming more violent and protest of injustice, as if a beaten race has such a thing. I truly feel sorrow for those times. In the lost regions to the west, a fierce power struggle erupted with several warring Lidors, all having the same ideal. A small group emerged above the rest, the Western Lakes, centered west of the lost region. The legend goes, 6 villages far west banded together in a desperate attempt for survival. They fended off the brutes to the south and Mara to the north, but even with this, their survival was uncertain. All this changed when a young girl named Sarah mastered the art of farming and brought in a new era of agriculture. The Westerners were saved. For the first time, they could begin working past survival. The people's hope was restored. Not only was she paraded in the streets, but seen as a messenger of the gods. Only Merusapur lovers saw her as some god, I note. She ended up creating the food halls and was the force that united the villages. From chiefs working together into something the people could truly believe in. Or so the legend goes. Once Sarah created the food halls, however, the Council of 6 was created soon after. They formed a proper government and expected Sarah to join them, though either out of greed or smart will, decided to remain outside control of the council. Still a part of the Western Lakes she was, but something akin to a kingdom within a kingdom. It confuses me, so moving on. Once united, over the next 50 years expanded their kingdom into the south, conquering all warring Lidors, led by Gasatan Yuri. I hear he was especially cruel to the southern people, even though they were but yet united some years earlier. I would have called him a lapdog to Riv, if not he was in the west. While the Westerners played kingdom, things were not okay in Rivshin. In 49 NC, NC stands for New Calendar, the local people raised up against Riv. At the center of that uprising was a man. A hero to some, I'm sure, but surely not mine. Otmir. I do thank him for what he brought down, though. Rivshin was an evil empire led by an evil man. Together with his brothers, he led a massive revolt against Riv. It did, however, take some time, with many failures, including the imprisonment of his first son, Otmir II, and ending of his own life. Oops. Despite all of that, they prevailed. His third son, Timir, united the Nayuran clans and marched on Ayeyo, the largest city east of capital. Timir was different from his kin, in that he wanted and tried to bring prosperity. Something about that truly warms my heart. With his trying brought about the rebellion, or as you've heard, the Rivshin Civil War. They rescued several key figures, along with the hero, Auron Singh Day. A dazzling man, to say the least. He was a former lieutenant of Rivshin before betraying him and joining Timir's rebellion. Auron single-handedly united the feuding Nayuran tribes and leaders of the new rebellion. They called themselves the Men of Central, East, and West. An unsightly name, if you ask me. Due to no surprise, nobody ever asked the opinion of a bored housewife. If they had, I would have named it Nazrin, meaning hope, for those illiterate. Auron, Doomingud Lark, leader of the Nayuran clans, and Timir, their assumed Lydor, prepared to march on capital, all while defending Ayeyo from the endless onslaught of Rivshin men. Right before they could march out, Foul with an army, 5,000 strong, launched a surprise attack. All seemed lost as the battle unfolded, and you could hear the butchering of husbands and sons from miles out. But it was here Auron showed his true skills and outwitted Foul on the battlefield, luring him into a trap and breaking said to be Rivshin's unbreakable armor. You know that as the battle of everlasting hope. If I could have been a mesquite to gaze upon Riv's face when hearing the news, oh, the clouds I would sleep on. After such a magnificent battle, Auron pushed Foul far back into the core lands, and back and forth occurred for several years with neither man taking or losing anything of grand value. It remained like this until Foul's cousin May, yes, that May, extremely beautiful, bright, and the most stern and surprisingly kind woman you'd ever meet. Nothing like her demon of a kinsman, thankfully. May met up with Foul, and together they attacked. It was a fierce battle that lasted long into the day, but at the end of it, the rebels had lost, and Auron, sadly, was dead. A death that did not need to come yet. The rebels began to flee, and Foul and May pursued. The war was all but won, and it seemed Riv's reign was all but certain to continue for eternity. But something truly strange happened. Keep in mind, I truly do not believe the Riv of then was of the same Riv from the old timescale. He was too people-like. No star would act in a manner he would, and no star would doom his people to suffering. If he really was the same Riv of the Riv before, then why not use his starly powers to destroy his enemies as before? The Star of Riv must have gone back into the endless night of up above, and left behind an ignorant, empty-headed, foolish man in the position of God. It's no wonder things turned out as they did. Whatever the case, Riv did something no one saw coming. Not his commanders, nor servant, and Foul was all but clueless. He abandoned his people, and fled to the stars, only know where. It'd make me feel better to think he simply crawled into a nest of Mara and let nature handle the rest. Truly a disgusting man. I cannot even begin to fathom the ever-complexing madness that revolves around such a foolhardy decision. Not only were his men shocked, but people on both sides were as well. Foul, May, Timir, and I'm sure Auron rolled over in his grave with the biggest smile I can imagine. And with that single act, the war was over. But not how anybody thought it would be. With such confusion, I hear May hightailed it back to Mayan. running ahead of her army several times before reaching the city.
She simply abandoned Val, while the rebels and the rest of the country remained clueless why this was even happening.
Mayan, even back then, being the largest city west of capital. And before you say anything, no, she's named after the city, not the other way around. As soon as she arrived, she claimed independence, denounced Riv of his horrors against the people, and founded the kingdom of Mayan. I'm afraid she was the only one drinking that soup as no one bought it. Crafty, however. With May gone, Fowl was left in the east, alone, looking like a goddamn buffoon. He, ever the loyalist, fled to capital with what remained of his army behind the absolute walls of Ural. He held out for close to a year before having the imperial gates breached and killed. I hear it took 100 men to bring him down, while he took out another 100 himself. Truly a marrow wearing people's skin. With the fall of capital, the reign of Rivshin had officially ended. In the year of the 12 Lidors, 55 NC. After 55 years of Riv's oppression, a new age of peace and prosperity followed. Or was supposed to. That's what everybody promised. That's what everybody said. But I don't think anybody truly believed that. Certainly not Otmir II. He was released from prison and saw his brother Timir for the first time in 6 years. I believe he had the throne on his mind straight out of the gates. The parties that followed in capital were surely extravagant. From what I understood, nobody could enjoy them. Plotting, scheming and plotting. Everybody alone had an ideal that was best for the core lands. But an ideal they all agreed on was defeating May. They all knew she was on her last leg. They all knew the people would turn against her. And just like they knew that, they knew they would win the battle. May offered peace to them. This land was destroyed by war and needed time to repair. But it's the rebels who, drunken in their egos, refused her offer. She claimed independence, but neither Timir, Doominggood, or even Otmir II accepted such an easy cop-out, which I admit, even I find less than swallowable. So, the preparations to march on Mayan began. Well, of course, after 20 days and nights of simultaneously celebrating and arguing between the different political factions, it's the luck of you herald they managed to leave capital at all without slitting each other's throats. On the march to Mayan, they stopped in Binsu to rest before battle. While discussing battle plans, Otmir simply stood up and announced, "Since this topic has not been addressed, I, the eldest brother, nominate myself as Lidor above our great people." His supporters clapped in hurrah while the rest of the room remained silent. He remained gloating, surprised, impressed by his tactfulness, that of an elephant. I would like to remind you he has been imprisoned for the last 6 years, almost the entirety of the Civil War. Besides his supporters, no one commented or moved. The tension he had laid was thick enough to be felt across the air and floorboards themselves. Shimnida responded to this brazen comment with, "He is right. A contest should be held to decide who will be Lidor. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. But does not everybody agree it best we wait until May is defeated? I believe your glory there will surely earn you some much-needed recognition." Before Otmir could even respond, the room cheered with joy that this matter had been done and settled. Otmir left the room, in which I can only imagine his face beaming red and blue. Another knife in the side of the former rebels. Doominggood the next night approached the table claiming he was creating an independent country, separate from the rebels once this was all over. I hear the fashion in which Timir declined them was the most kind and polite way to tell somebody to know their place. The laughters were so loud they could be heard all the way back in capital. Doominggood, 40% of the rebel army, moved his camp across from them, pouting like a child. When the sun raised, Doominggood was gone, seen marching back to Ayeo late into the night. Timir then announced the creation of the Kingdom of Owen, him proposed as Lidor. This time met with applause and approval. I can only imagine the fury Otmir must have felt at that moment. Despite the drama, they still had a battle to win. The rebels clashed with Mayan forces several times, with the rebels being gifted a string of minor defeats. These defeats, however, were slowly pushing her all the way to Mayan, simply because she was outnumbered. Doomingud, in the last days of the battle, returned with Harak Ark, Shimnida's son, by his side. Together they pushed May all the way back to Mayan over the course of a decade. It's then they were hit with a devastating defeat. Once regrouped, tension inside the rebel command was an understatement. Timur could no longer keep everybody together. At the next war council, things couldn't have gone any worse, short of everybody killing each other and wearing their heads like festive hats. Otmir blaming Timur, Timur blaming Doomingud, while Doomingud blaming Timur and everybody else around him. My mom says the fool pointed so many fingers, even him and his men did not come unscathed. Doomingud left first. Soon, several lords followed in his stead, and within a baby's minute of time, the war council had devolved into a pissing match. As in, who can regurgitate the most needlessly insulting words at each other? Within 2 days' end, Timur had lost 4/5 of his army and some of his most trusted lieutenants. The eastern cities were lost to the Nairan clans. Then the central core lands had devolved into a dozen minor families and wannabe Lidors, fighting for the stars only know what. Through all this madness, 4 Lidors came out above the rest. Timur, a smart, wise, calculating man in the capital behind its unbreakable walls, which you already know. Otmir II, petite, impatient, and said to have bad manners overall. He is the older brother to Timur and was held up in the southern province. Shimnida Ark, calm, joyful, a tongue of silver and gold. In fact, my mother always described him as an endless basket of joyful time wasting. I still do not know what she thinks of the man. And Ongdan, in the easternmost region before reaching the Nairan clans. Otmir wasted no time and in only 3 decades formed the minor kingdom of Madhyan and marched on Timur. All his efforts and fast political moves would eventually lead to his undoing, however. He may be able to promise grand returns and riches, but a military man he is not. Once outside of the capital, Otmir demanded the city and his rightful claim to power be handed over. Timur returned his messenger with 2 boxes, one with a box full of shit, and another with a letter stating, "There's your claim to power. If you want more, send a bigger box. You are impatient for it." Timur proceeded to stand guard behind the walls of Ural, all while bracing Otmir's rage. He only had to wait for winter, and winter came. I hear that one was especially cold. Sometime in the first decade of 57, Otmir's forces were cut in half by starvation, then desertion. He was humiliated and forced to march home. Once returned, he was assassinated by his war council. I believe he was replaced by Achin. No, it was Akum, whatever the case was. The real war for the core lands were just starting up. Known today as the War of Coral-e-Coralica, these were a series of wars fought between the kingdoms of Mayan and Ohan, Timur and May. They were bitter enemies, rivals through and through. Early and throughout the year of 57, May began launching small attacks into Ohan. Timur would match her only to find she retreated long before he arrived. After Timur began letting his guard down and sending fewer and fewer men to deal with this annoyance, she launched a full-blown attack into Ohan. But Timur feeling something off about this. One particular attack. He sallied out with his personal guard, just in time to counterattack May, pushing her all the way back to Binsu and across the Mapurin River. My father said it was always well known Timur's hatred of May and her countrymen. Timur called her the dying tiger of Riv, as funny as it would be now. The name definitely did not stick. During these wars, Shimnida united under Timur, and together they wiped out Akum in the late summer of 58. That same year, the Western Lakes broke out into a full-blown civil war. May took advantage of the situation and launched a surprise attack on the Western Lakes. For being what they are, Salviz Ruolpin, their pack leader, as they call it, put up a grand fight. Pointless, as Mayan's top commander Zunmi Tai was in charge of the army. I hear he was a charming man, smart, thought out his actions, but not only that, a strong-willed man who never gave any ground. Too strong-willed at times, many say. At a feast, he once refused May herself an invitation to be seated at her table. The tension was so high, my mom says it could be cut with a dulled knife. Somehow, he still drawed breath to lead her men. With such a man at the helm, I'm surprised the Westerners lasted for 4 years. Barely, I might add. In 60 NC, the Westerners had lost and gave independence to Sarah the hero, Sarah the food bringer, Sarah the goddess. Too big a head for somebody living in dirt huts and harvesting wild crops. The Western Lakes were nothing but Meru sappers claiming to have pure Nadon blood. I was surprised to hear at one point their kingdom was almost as powerful as Mayan. If fools did not steer the ship, they could have kept it as so. I'm not knowledgeable about things in the Eastern Mote, so bear with me. The Civil War, put simply enough, was a lack of trust. Sarah had too much power. She controlled the main source of food collection, distribution, and production. She even had a private army that was not subject to Western law. Why does a servant of God and food worker need that? Thinking about it, I don't think I would have trusted her either. Afterwards, Sarah formed the kingdom of Izda. A year later, the Westerners lost again against Zunmi. He took their eastern lands and the decline of the Western Lakes began. The Council of Six are fools, and Sarah, a bigger one at that.
Truly nauseating. The lady does tell the story from the only way she knows how. Sarah, May, Timir, and all others. They all sought after what they thought was best, and doing so led to the death of tens of thousands. No one in the past is good, and in the future no one is bad. It's only how one seeks to interpret others' action, through their bias, and that of their lack of effort, that one becomes either good or bad.
Desolate times, and they would not get better. In 60 NC, the kingdom of Arsasen fell. A somewhat united kingdom of Yurnen and clansmen were embroiled in a killing frenzy of who can swing their sticks the fastest. I once traded with a man from there. Hairy to be damned and smelled like the backside of a rotting horse. Surprising good trader. When talking to him, he said one thing that stuck out to me. Wanting to not fight cost me my whole family. A coward. While they were busy killing themselves, we were trying to get things back to normal. In 63, our leader Timur launched a surprise attack on the kingdom of Mayan, striking the important river city of Bensu. I hear the whore went to her husband's chambers crying when she heard the news. I don't blame her. 5,000 well-trained men of Ohan marched on her. Imitation of the impregnable walls. Impregnable they were not. However, during this battle, Bolden knew Timur's top general got surrounded. That day he fought with the power of 10 men. Timur without hesitation jumped into the fray. Alone he pierced his way closer and towards Bolden. It is said that Timur was covered in so much Mayan blood that he wore the attire of battle paint. The very sight of him scared his opponents into death, or damn near at least. Once he finally made it to Bolden, it was too late. Upon seeing his friend's lifeless body, he and his men went into a bloody rage. They pushed deep into May's left line, routing her entire army all the way back to Bensu. Before the gates could close, they stormed in, and the fight continued from buildings to streets to people. While the streets were engulfed in flames, somehow May managed to rally her men and push Timur out of the city. With this information I'm about to tell you, many do not know. Timur in his rampage lost over a quarter of his army. A victory to avenge at Bensu and tear down those imitations, but a loss to his army as a whole. And Bolden Yu was an even greater loss. We would never have a general of such talent again. Labiek certainly was no replacement. With such losses, Timur was forced to call off the invasion. After the siege, it took 10 years before Bensu was running at full strength again. That hurt my endeavors, so I know it hurt hers. Timir returned home a hero. Even though May still drew breath, it was her pride that was shattered. Her so-called invincible army could no longer proudly hold that title. Even a day was created for this success, known as the Victory of Bensu. Best part about the day is that the women were less than well dressed. In the West during my travels, things were a shit show. Their economy was in terrible shape, and getting even worse with the looting of Bensu, food, silver, at an all-time high while wood plummeted. The roads were becoming more dangerous than the northern cities. Back then, the Tims were becoming more venturous. Many of my trading partners would depart to never return. It seemed losing 2 wars and close to a fourth of their land was not good for commerce. I've never been so fearful to set upon the roads in West Mote. Soon, a miracle was to happen. A beautiful discovery. Pinshu, a religious item to ward off evil spirits and medicine, made with mixing silver, Lutheran, and some other things. Never worked for me as all my clients are beyond evil. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, it was extremely good for business, and the creator of this, Illuingus, had become so powerful and so wealthy that the Council of 6 invited him into the council itself, making them the Council of 7. He didn't even have a village to govern, so everyone knew what was happening. These old sacks were so scared that he might become another Sarah that they kept him close. It was almost comical at times, if not for the fact that they had him, that the Tims had him killed only 6 years later. Maybe Sarah had the right ideal after all. The Tims, or Bokuba Tims, are a mountainous tribal people in the Mato Mountains. You know them as those savages in the north. Their villages are infamous for being hard to find, even more so for trading with. Best part about them is that they tend to bless us with their presence, raping and taking our women whenever they damn please. Trade was no vacation in the northern areas, that's for damn sure. Alu's death kickstarted the Bokuba War, which was more a series of village raids than any actual war. That same year, I began to hear rumors about an alternate trade route. It would bypass the kingdom of Mayan and cut straight through the mountains and Timmy lands. This rumor got me and my compatriots very excited. Well, except for the whole Timmy thing. It was funded by Timir and heard it had been worked on since 57 NC. A lot of work must have been put into this thing to get the Timmys to work with us. If he could pull off something as crazy as that, well, May's propped up economy at the time by Ohan trade would be cut in third at least, if not half. With this trade route being unofficially revealed, me, my then partners, and a slew of other traders were ecstatic. We knew we were going to make a lot of salt out of this. But everyone worried about May. What was she going to do? Was she really going to sit back while her economy fell apart? That was unlike her. Timir remained silent, as he should have. Let's just say tension was at an all-time high in the core lands. And then a tragedy occurred. Timir passed away in the winter of 69. I have only cried twice in my life. The first time was when my wife died, and then the second time was then. The only option was it had to be May. Spies have been found in the capital before, and it so happens he dies as word of the trade route comes out. She couldn't stand to lose her endless feast and indulge in her depravities. With her, Zanmi never went without want. Now that Timir had passed, his son Ortmir III, only 17 years old, took the throne. Not soon after his ascension, a lot of retired soldiers were beginning to express their worries. Timir had promised them grand riches and all the women they could handle, if they took Bensu back in 63 NC. But as we all know, Bensu was never taken, and they were never paid. Soon a massive uprising had sprung forward. Half of Ortmir's retirees joined the rebel forces north of capital in the mining city of Raden, and if he didn't do anything soon, a lot more would be joining them. Their forces marched with over 7,000 men, and heading straight for the capital. There were troubles among the men, however. Many men simply wanted to be paid their fair share. Others wanted to overthrow Ortmir III, while some wanted to pillage simply for pillage's sake. In fact, I was caught up in this mess, believe it or not. Some of my biggest trading partners were in Raden, and I was on my way there when I heard. The two armies clashed and our leader Ortmir III lost. They regrouped later with Herrick and beat them off. We only found out later that Ren, one of Timir's top advisors, was the real commander. Ortmir did shit all. My daughter described him as a boy who was always dripping behind the ear, but I just call him what everyone else is thinking, a pussy. He was too young then, too inexperienced, and Timir left us too early. Whatever the case, Ren chased them all the way back to Raden. Safe to say, I was not going to be trading there this cycle. The rebels held out for quite a long time, close to 70 days from what I remember. They eventually surrendered and in turn were all slaughtered. Men, women, children alike. The town soon repopulated, but it was never the same. And I lost a fortune because of it. Not only that, but the economy was hit pretty hard. I don't know what they were thinking. Remember that Buckable War I mentioned before? Well, that officially kicked off that year. All it served to do was lead the Western Links further into the economical collapse. Pensu was good and all, but when all the money is spent on a pointless war, what's the damn point? Revenge of Isle. Rally behind us my ass. In 69, May's husband was killed in his sleep. She remarried the following Decca, in less than 40 days. You guessed it, Zunmi. But what was a surprise was the 2-day uprising that occurred the following year. She took off her other kids from the line succession and put Zunmi's newborn in their place. 2 fucking days the city of Maine was engulfed in a fierce power struggle between the Riv Loyalist faction and the Riv Loyalist faction number 2, or the May faction. That was the perfect chance to attack, and I know Timir would have jumped on it immediately. An opportunity like that would never come again. Ren should have led until Ortmir was ready, but the opportunity came and the opportunity left. In 72 NC, the new trade route was established through the mountains, and it was better than rumored. The journey was much longer, about 1.5 decades longer. Not only was it much more secure than the established trade routes in the Heartlands, but with the Buckable Wars in full swing, trade with northern cultures and the Eastern Tims made anybody traveling along the route very rich, very fast. Within 2 years, I had already made a fortune, became a landowner and a permanent resident in Selfless. I no longer had to travel to make my money, and was soon on my way to building a merchant caravan. Best time in my life. The best times never last, it seems. Because in 74 NC, May launched a full invasion deep into the Corelands. It was like water had swept over the Corelands and drowned anyone who was foe. Ortmir did shit all to stop it. Many towns fell, one after another, and they were on the capital soon enough. This was an extremely critical time, with the economy just recovering with the North Meadow trade route opening up. Zunmi headed north of Raden, while Ortmir, Ren, and Umail, another advisor, defended capital. Labiek, a trusted, experienced friend and commander of Ortmir, was still east dealing with raids from disloyal Bokoba and Yordanen tribes. Once he heard the news, he began marching towards capital as fast as possible. Harak Ark, regent of the Eagles region, left Eagles as fast as possible with 1,500 men. Harak, instead of lifting the siege of capital, decided to protect Raden and wait for Labiek. The thing with that is, the men of Eagles aren't really known for their fighting prowess. They met in open battle just outside of Raden. Went as well as one would expect a collector to be just and a kind person. The man was a coward. Nothing as his father. I hear before the battle was over, he had already left with his tail between his legs and climbing the walls of Raden. A rat in another life, I guessin'. With his defeat, the only hope for Ortmir at the time was Labiek. I don't know many details of the siege itself that doesn't parade May as some god or star, but I hear it was extremely rough, and many men were butchered with unrelenting waves of Mayan men clashing against the gates. May was eventually joined by her new husband Zunmi Tai. Even they could not breach Urol. Many men from both sides were dying from starvation during winter, and despite all this, another 500 to 2,000 butchers joined May with an overwhelming army of 4,000 to 6,000 men. I haven't mentioned Labiek since the start of the siege, and there's a reason, as just like his contributions to the siege, he is irrelevant to this story. To think, what would have happened if Bolden was alive then? It's said this put the first siege of capital during the Rivsician Civil War to shame. due to its sheer brutality and unrelenting attacks from May. The outskirts of capital was covered in blood and bodies. The grass turned red and the lake surrounding it became a land bridge of dead flesh, which was once living men. In 76 NC, during the beginnings of winter, somehow a Mayan spy had broken into the city and opened the gates. Once into capital, it was ravaged for the second time in under 30 years. Those savages, men and women, old and young, the same. The pillage and rape lasted for nearly 6 days while May laughed her ass off and watched the Pichka. After it was all over, most of the town was dead. Many of my friends and family as well. Ortmir, his advisors, and all of his government was slaughtered. She claims to be just, but her actions paint her more a Mara or a monster than any hero. Ortmir III was a fool, but he didn't deserve to be hung like some animal. My stomach grows tilted thinking about it. I'm done for the night. Let the stars watch over you for this sleep, as clearly the Mirs are no longer.
The Mote region and its like, we're still feeling the effects set in motion by Otmir, the first all those years ago. Were these desolate times or golden? I often ponder how so many could hate another for doing the very thing they sought out to do. The housewife who believed in May, and the old trader who only sought to lick the ground Timir and his like walked on. Facts are fact, until they disagree with you. Then suddenly, they're up for debate. We hear again from Lazaelta's story of events to end things. A fresh mind she is, as though she is unbearable. At least skin remains on one's body when she speaks.
A tragedy to have such a young boy killed in such a manner. The massacre of capital was indescribable for my mother, as I had to be told by my father what it was. Blood ran so high in certain parts of the streets, it was 3 to 4 inches thick. In remembrance of that day, they say, not me, mind you, in certain places you can find a certain drink, a Bloody Mayan. Having one, let's say, will be the finest and most luxurious way to misplace your head from your body. I hear some years ago, a servant offered one to May out of pure spite. His balls were huge, I'm sure. I'm also sure he will never be able to use them again. Otmir, Ren, Yume were all killed, and I can only assume Labiak escaped. The fox. Wouldn't be surprised if he was the one who opened the gates himself. After capital fell, Harak raised flags of war. The sorry fool. All men of the same mind flocked to his dwellings, leading to quite the formidable arms. May, seeing the senseless bloodshed, tried and failed to negotiate terms. For what I can only assume amounted to, lick my foot or die. After only a few decades of this back and forth, she grew tired of that, and in 76 marched on the Ecos region. A series of battles followed with May challenging Harak to one-on-one combat and being met with a blinding of arrows. He was eventually killed by his own men due to his sheer lack of balls. The new commander was defeated, and besides Erasasan, the core lands of the Mote region were united once again, now under the kingdom of Mayan, May as Lydor. A splendid day, I'm sure. Throughout the year and the next several, rebellions popped up in Mayan and were put down, mostly being from Equals. The Western Lakes were finally overthrown by their very general, Alfel Yuri, Gasatan Yuri's son, backed by mercenaries from north of Yuami. Sounded like an abysmal year for them. His fun didn't last long, however. Only 8 years later, he was overthrown by those very same mercenaries, forming the kingdom of Dusa Silma, meaning strong soul. They are heretics, who believe Riv the god, not the man, was the one who was betrayed and not Uherald.
How ludicrous is that? As far as I'm concerned, the god and the man are both undigested piles of shit. I've been gestured by pushy men who shall not be named. That's unladylike. Keeping on, these mercenaries formed the kingdom of Dusa Silma, which was led by Chinook Quill, and I know nothing about them, nor do I care to understand reversal heretics. As far as their country, they put down some rebellions which lasted all the way till 88. In 87, we entered an alliance with Dusa Silma, and the only thing good about this is I was born by this point. So maybe my baby memory might help tell a better story. At this time, Elish Alfond, current Lydor of Isda and daughter of Sarah Alfond, passed away, leaving her husband, Bullock Bassac, in charge. Didn't last long, as Bassac was soon put into a self-imposed banishment, handing Piper Alfond, not his son, the throne. Have no idea how a man could manage that. I don't think Bullock's son, nor the Alfond family were consulted about this. Bullock's son was the opposite of joyful and blessed tears. His name eludes me, and I'm sure it will come to me later when it is all but useless. In Mayan, things seemed unsightly for some time. Jeffrel, May's first child, slapped his niece Mia for a rude comment towards him. Tensions were so high that a misplaced burp could set the whole kingdom ablaze. May was a fantastic Lydor, but a horrible woman in her late life. Her family was in shambles as political factions were beginning to rise out of the woodworks between her many kids, from many husbands over the years. I'm sure you can already imagine the bloodshed. When Jeffrel slapped her, it felt like the stars fell down from the very slots themselves. Armies razed, villages burned, and trade halted. Only by Uheral's grace that May was able to stop them all. Bless her heart. But as we come closer to the present, we all know. May passed away quietly in her sleep nearly 12 days ago. I still tear up thinking about it. There are current rumblings as to who will keep the throne between May's many children from her first, second, and third husbands. But that's all they are, rumblings. Things seem peaceful. As far as I know, they are peaceful. I have my 2 kids and a loving husband. Whoever will lead us in the future, as long as it is not Lou, I'm sure we will be fine. Sometimes I simply wonder, what is next? What kind of world are my kids gonna grow up in? I suppose if I raise them right and Uherald looks over them, they should be fine.
A pattern. A circle that doesn't know when or even how to end. Sarah, Timir, May, and even Riv. They all left many marks on this world. With them now gone, a new generation that they have raised will lead this world to peace and prosperity, or war and destruction. Why do you continue on? What's the point of it all? Questions like these only serve to distract. Power isn't abstract, it's defined, precise, and predictable. Power is the name given to people who have risen in value, not in the value of wealth or family names, but in the value others see in the decision-making and skills in one that is not yourself. The rare ones see the layers. Time and time again, however, it's often the powerful ones that only see the surface. When you scroll out and see what this world has to offer, while important to them, it is minuscule to the rest of the world, and in fact downright irrelevant to a man fishing, looking at the endless sky above, 3,000 kilometers away.